about to begin. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. We want to welcome you to the Vampire and Devil Show. It's gonna be bloody fun. We're gonna kill everyone. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show. With lots of blood and lots of guts. Two horror fanatics and rock and roll nuts. Welcome to the Vampire and Devil Show. You should watch the Vampire and Devil podcast, or I'll make you float. Hey, it's Jesus, and I approve this message from the Vampire and Devil podcast. They're A-OK in my book.
Hey there, ghouls and goblins, spooks and creeps. We're right back with you guys to talk a little bit more about another incredibly interesting and hair-raising review that we have to talk about. Can't exactly say, Devil, whether or not I would call this maybe some of the best work ever put out. Don't necessarily think that an award of proper magnitude would be coming the way of this movie. But we're going to get down with a little bit of Easter candy. You and I recently watched Rottentail.
Silly rabbit.
Yes, we did. Getting into the Easter celebrations, we decided to watch a horror movie that was Easter related. And we decided to choose Rottentail because of all the horror movies about Easter and the Easter Bunny. This is the top rated one. And I use top rated very loosely. Because if this is top rated, I'd hate to see what the low rated movies were like.
Yeah. But I will say, starting off though on a positive note, as we kick it back to you, the cast wasn't exactly scrubs. I mean, they had some established people in this movie.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. We were getting ready to watch the movie and we're seeing names and we're seeing faces, and all of a sudden, like, the guy who plays Peter Cottontail is the actor who was in The Stand, who played Harold, who was always after the chick from Breakfast Club, going after her all the time in the movie. And then the antagonist guy in this movie, who is the Jesus freak, trying to market money off of the people who want to give money to the faith, is the dude from Copycat that was the main killer that was going after Sigourney Weaver. Not Harry Connick Jr., but the Copycat killer. So yeah, it had some interesting cast members in this movie, and it was like, what? And then the main chick was, she started off in Face Off and a couple other good movies that she's been in. So yeah, it's like, when we started, we're like, okay, maybe this just got a bad review because people can't take a joke and don't like cheesy horror movies. But as we will continue talking about it, the rating is actually giving it better than probably what it deserved.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it was definitely an experience, to say the least. So it basically stems around a scientist's love affair of rabbits and a experimental mutation drug that he's been developing that the U.S. military is trying to get a hold of, basically to, like, make super soldiers. That's kind of the basic premise of this. And while he's holding this serum, he's checking on one of his rabbits that has since been, like, mutated by, like, another scientist or whatever the situation may be. And the rabbit bites him, and so the serum gets, all over his hand and in his blood, and starts mutating him into what will become Rottentail. The rabbit itself gets, like, its own kind of secondary strength and ends up eventually breaking out of its cage and going on a little side rampage about it till that little guy meets his demise at one point. But but back to the main character, you've got Peter Cotton, who is this kind of just nerdy guy. And the one thing that was funny that I remember us talking about is the idea of this character is very interesting, where like he's not overly like hunky either, but he's like that just kind of nerd guy. And now he's becoming, to a certain degree, not only the villain, but the hero, depending on how you want to look at it, where it also spawns into an interesting love connection because Anna Banana, of all actual character names, is originally simply trying to use him to get the drop on her, what was it, her father's like former church that they were looking to tear down after it was protected, but her ex-husband bribed the historical society to unprotect it. So she kind of wants to use him as a lookout, as her wingman, to basically do some crime.
Yeah.
And by the end of the movie, kind of wants him to live as he's, suffering a decision.
Yeah, it was a really crazy movie. Like you said, it starts off with him getting bitten, and all of a sudden the movie kind of goes into this weird place where you see him as the Rottentail, and he's smoking a cigar, and he's watching like past movies of his life, and it goes back into the time when his childhood, and then a rabbit gets killed, and talks about his obsession with that his rabbit was his best friend, and you find out the antagonist from the kid like that is the antagonist now, and that runs the church. Yeah, and it's really weird. Like the timing is like, where did this come from all of a sudden? And then all of a sudden you're back into the movie again. And like I said, yeah, it kind of reminded me of like that's his transformation when we were talking about watching it. Kind of reminded me of a little bit of Jerry Lewis from The Nutty Professor.
Yeah.
Where he's kind of coming into himself, and he's turning into this Rottentail, but then he starts telling crazy one-liners and making jokes, and he's very more confident, sort of, and he's very sexual in nature, and he's, it's like kind of like how Jerry Lewis was in Nutty Professor, except for, he's a maniac killing, rabbit mutant.
Right. And it's a weird setup. Like you and I were talking about what production company this might fall under. Would it be a Troma movie? Would it be a Full Moon movie? I personally find it's closer to a Troma movie myself, because while Full Moon still has that niche comedy horror mixed with a little bit of like absurdity, where you've got those crazy characters like a Killjoy, or you've got those out there premises like an Evil Bong or a Ginger Dead Man character. I just find the overall movie, from the sheer absurdity, the weirdness of blood, and the overly sexual nature, for me, I just find it to be definitely much more of something I would see out of Lloyd Kaufman's brain than Charles Band.
Oh yeah, because like that's throughout this whole entire movie we were talking about. It's just so naughty and sexual innuendos. I mean, you got the one army guy who takes the serum and has a boner the whole entire time. Dick. And they starts getting beat up by his boner, and the Rottentail has sex with his girlfriend, and he all of a sudden, and then he's got the farts, and he shits like Fruity Pebbles, and it's over the top, like just how like Lloyd Kaufman and the Troma movies are, because their movies are always to the extremeness of like obscenities and obscurities and craziness of movies. It's like what crazy thing can we put together and not make any sense? Okay, let's put it in a trauma movie. That's what it's kind of reminded me of a little bit. Not as, and the bad thing about it is not as good as enough quality of a movie. Because the sad thing about it is trauma, as bad and as crazy they are, the production of it is still pretty decent. This production was pretty low.
Very low. No, for sure. Because if I'm gonna compare it to a trauma movie or a series, for me, it's 100% Class of Nukem High, where it's that chemicals, that lots of sex, overall sexuality, people becoming other things. Like, remember, the nerds of the school are what became the Cretans and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the absurdities there. So like, probably my favorite at the time kill of the movie was the, as you put it, the Samuel L. Jackson-esque army general who is like going on a rampage, like taking people out, trying to kill Rottentail after he was trying to have sex with his wife and got disturbed. So he's literally wearing like sweatpants with an erection, and he's trying to do all this just to have Rottentail grab him by his erection and then just keep bashing him off the walls till he like caves in his brain.
Yeah, and then the mad scientist in this movie brings him back to life with the serum and electricity, kind of like Frankenstein, a nod to Frankenstein, except for the electricity is jolting right into his boner.
Right. And while that's going on, you've got Rottentail having sex with the general's wife. But here's the thing that was so hilarious. The general leaves his wife ball gagged and tied to the bed. And all of us, so then, Rottentail shows up, pulls it down his pants, exposes his only couple of inches, and she, with complete ease, spits out her ball gag to criticize his size. Then is like, well, fuck it, we're going to get down anyway. Let's do it bunny style. And all of a sudden, she just simply turns over onto all fours like it's nothing. And I remember you and I looking at each other, be like, wasn't she just tied to the bed?
Yeah, we were like,
who missed that detail?
Yeah, the continuity of this movie is not very fluid.
No, definitely not. And then the general comes back after being like boner electrified into like a super soldier, almost kind of Super Shredder style from the Ninja Turtles. Not by size, but just by like kind of mutant, like voicing, just absurdity, taking people out, but then in typical Super Shredder Ninja Turtle style, basically gets squashed with relative ease.
Yeah. They have this fight. All of a sudden, Rottentail is deciding whether or not he wants to let himself die or stay as Rottentail. And he comes to epiphany, like, yeah, I'm going to become Rottentail. Comes back and starts doing kung fu moves and drop kicks. And yeah, it became very like WWE style fighting all of a sudden.
Yeah. Like very, very strange. And because you've also got like, and it's all being watched by like his like love interest who he was in back in the day, because Rottentail is also basically trying to get revenge on the ex-husband of his love interest, because her ex-husband was his grade school bully and murdered his pet rabbit. And it's just so all over the place, because I remember us watching, and you already touched on it, where the movie started in what appeared to kind of make sense. And then all of a sudden, yeah, you've got Rottentail basically narrating his adolescent life. And it's like, wait, how is he now? He just got bit and infected, almost Spider-Man style. And now he's just narrating like The Godfather.
Yeah.
And then it kind of gets caught up to present time where he's back as a human before he starts like changing, kind of like, I guess, what you would equivalent to, like, I guess, The Fly with,
Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah. That, like I said, it just jumped out of nowhere, and you're like, what the hell? But like you were saying earlier, that I think the out of all the absurdities of this entire movie, and you kind of pinched on it a little bit, is the names in this movie. Like
Yeah.
they said, the main guy is Peter Cotton, which obviously Peter Cottontail. You have her name Anna, which we said her real name in the movie is not nickname. Her name is Anna Banana. And then you had another sergeant guy earlier in the movie that comes out of nowhere, whose name is Sergeant Slaughter.
Yes.
We're just like, who wrote the names for this movie? They're like, oh, okay, we're just gonna come with the most obscure and most idiotic names we could possibly think of. Well, Anna Banana, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, seriously. And one of the things that we found to be pretty interesting is, and you pretty much picked up on it right away because you're a bigger fan of this record label, these bands than I am. But the band Twisted their music was just rampant throughout this movie.
Yeah. I remember hearing we came back a couple of years ago, but I remember hearing that Twisted was going to be predominantly in a movie, and like their music was used in the trailer. And all of a sudden, we're watching this movie, and all of a sudden, I'm like, that sounds like Twisted a little bit. I'm like, man, maybe it is, and I look it up, and then later on, there's more Twisted coming out. Then there was a couple other Twisted songs that I knew, and I'm like, yeah, it's definitely Twisted in this movie, which is kind of funny that like out of all the bands that are that could be out there, that they put themselves in the movie that might not be the greatest thing in the world, but I have to say that that's probably one of the better things about this movie was the fact that it did have twisted tracks in it.
Yeah.
I'm like that. I was like that kind of bumped it up a little bit extra for me because at least they had good music.
Yeah, I mean, the soundtrack was actually pretty good. I mean, outside of just Twisted, but they had some other like quality, like kind of punk rock and like rock and metal type songs that they were splicing in there as well. I feel like the only thing we were semi-shorted on was an actual appearance from Twisted somewhere for whatever
Yeah.
reason. Even it was just like a music video playing on a TV.
Yeah, speaking of it, so we were talking about music videos. That's a good way to segue in it. Although there is no 100% proof that is actually on it because he's not credited, while he's flipping through these things and they're showing these channels and he's watching the movies on the TV, there looked like there was an infomercial with the famous Ron Jeremy in it, which
Yes.
only went on for a couple seconds. Apparently, it's not credited, so we're not 100% sure. But I know Ron Jeremy, and he's a very distinctive person that you can't replace him with anybody else. So once you see him, hey, that's Ron Jeremy. So I'm pretty sure Ron Jeremy was even in this movie for a brief 2 seconds.
And honestly, for the high level of just phallic fuckery, why not?
Yeah.
Like seriously, like he just belongs. Like, of course he's there.
No, yeah. It almost made me feel kind of like, hey, Ron, do you want to be in this movie? No. Okay, I'm just going to go find a clip from him from something, and I'm going to put him in the damn movie without him even knowing.
Right, seriously. It's almost like Halloween 3, where yes, it's a John Carpenter movie, but like it has nothing to do with Michael Myers, but they still found a way to just stick him on a TV.
Yep.
Like, you know what? We're just gonna give you a film credit.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, that's just the small tip of the craziness of this movie. Like I said, the IMDb page rips the crap out of this movie. All the users are like, do not watch this movie. This movie's horrible. And like I said, the rating wise, and I don't always believe some ratings. IMDb users don't like campy horror movies a lot of times, so they get bad ratings. And I mean, one of the worst rated movies on IMDb is Howard the Duck, and I love Howard the Duck.
Love Howard.
So, so I take that for a grain of salt sometimes. But like I said, this one being the higher rating, because a lot of the Easter ones we were looking at possibly doing were three. This one was like a 3.6 or 3.7. They were like 2.8s and 2.7s and 2.3s, and I'm like, man, if this is a 3.7 and those 2.3s are 2.3s, man, I'm kind of glad we chose this one over some of those other ones then.
Yeah, for sure, because it's like the ability to finish the movie, which we did, gets it the minimal score, gets it to what my minimal score is always gonna be to be able to finish the movie. But however, I do gotta bring this up, or I feel like we're not judging and commenting credibly, is while there was a lot of campy fun to this movie, a lot of twists and turns, this movie was fucking long, dude.
Yeah.
And it's not so much that it was long literally, it was just long feeling.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
at one point, I had to pick up a phone call from Mrs. Vamp, and I was like, "Give me just a second." And so we paused the movie, and that was that. And we went back to continue because we were just, seeing what else we needed to accomplish that day. And it was like, "Hey, man, let's check how much time is just left in this movie." And I thought it was going to be like 12 minutes left, like 15 minutes left. There was almost 40 minutes left in this movie when we checked how far along we were. And the movie runs at an hour 46. So I was sure we had to have been around an hour 30, an hour 32 or whatever. But we still had a third of the movie to go. And I remember looking at you after we saw that and just being like, "What the fuck, man?"
Yeah. For a low budget independent film to go an hour and 45 minutes, and like you said, we were only an hour into it, and it felt like we were been watching it for 3 hours. We were like, what the hell, man? Like, we're like, when was this train wreck gonna end? It's like, and like you said, when we paused it and we went back to it, we're like, well, there's still 45. What the hell? They already finished like half of this movie. Like, what else is left to do?
Yeah, like
Why is there still 45 minutes left?
Like no pun intended for all the phallic humor that we have, but like we really felt like we were coming to the climax of this movie, where it was just like, okay, he's done all of this, he's been infected, he's long since become Rottentail, he's already brutally murdered given four quality kills, and he's in the area that you can just tell and feel is where the movie's going to end. And it just, you're there. They basically have his youth, his bully from his childhood cornered, and his girlfriend, loosely quoted, is there. And it's just like, you really feel like there's nothing left, just to find out that there's like 40 minutes of things left. And you're just like, what is left to go over? Like, how much blood can you squeeze from this stone?
Yeah. Speaking of that, so, before we get into our obituaries, you're talking about blood. This movie was very, very bloody, very graphic. I think the best part of this whole entire movie was when the bad nemesis guy blows off the head of one of his workers that messed him up or messed up something, and blows his head off with a shotgun, and it just blood goes everywhere, and it's shooting out, and he's just like, the whole entire time he's like, this is a cool, what the hell happened to his head? His head's not here, and it's just blood squirting for like 20 minutes out of his head, and he's like, it's still not here, his head is gone.
There's still blood squirting out.
It was over the top blood, but that was probably the better part of the movie, was just the absurdity of blood
the absurdity of blood, the absurdity of kills, And before we officially get into our kill ratings and the obituaries, we have to talk about the ending of the movie, because this is something that we've discussed now regularly. I think it's clear to say that this is becoming a thing for us. So there is a sequel tease, if you want to call it that. It does come back around to the general's wife, who is in the hospital about to give birth. Her husband is there. The general is there, who we have yet to really discuss, but we're going to discuss it now. He is now nothing more than a talking head, because he was just full on decapitated by Rottentail. But apparently, whatever that serum is just keeping him alive as this talking head. And his wife gives birth to a baby Rottentail. And all you hear is she's screaming. The doctors are like, what the fuck? And the head is like, that's not my kid. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a mutated bunny. It's because he was white. The general's black, his wife is black, but his commentary on the situation has nothing to do with the fact that a mutated rabbit just came out of his wife's, lady parts, and it was the fact that a white rabbit came out of his wife's lady parts.
Yeah. Out of all the craziness, he's like, "Hey, that kid's not black." I'm like, one, it's a rabbit. It's a mutated rabbit, so obviously the kid is not yours anyway, because it's a rabbit. So yeah, it was just, and like you said, the general, like we mentioned earlier, kind of very Samuel L. Jackson-ish. When he came in, he was like, "Motherfucker this, motherfucker that, motherfucker this, motherfucker that." I was like, man, okay, this guy is supposed to be the wannabe Samuel L. Jackson of the movie. Yeah, it was for me, like you said, when the rabbit came out, I pray to whatever deity that we want to pray to. Whoever you choose them all. Pray to all of them. Pray to every religion in the world, even Ronald Hubbard and Scientology. Pray to every one of them that they do not make a sequel to this movie, because they do not need to make a sequel to this movie. I would rather see The Crow remake 100 million times than that. I mean, even the bad movies that I've seen and remakes and remodels and sequels and all that. I honestly, if they made a sequel to this movie, that's when the Antichrist comes.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, they make a sequel to this movie. We're not discussing it. It's not gonna. It's not getting a feature. I mean, one thing I will say though about the general is he did have some quality, laughable one-liners, because after his decapitation, I remember the doctor carrying him by his head, and the only thing that he could say was, "Hey, somebody go back and get my dick."
Yeah.
Like, just absolutely wild, dude. But yeah, so as far as our discussion about whether or not we're rooting for a sequel, fuck no.
No. But then again, certain movies that are really, really bad, and maybe we'll talk about, we'll come to terms eventually to talk about it, but we can mention it right now, like the Pooh movie, the Winnie the Pooh movie. That movie was so bad that I couldn't finish it, and yet has a sequel. So, who knows? Maybe they might make a Rottentail 2. Maybe they already have and nobody knows about it. I don't know, but God, I hope not.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. So let's turn our attention to the kills, to the kill rating on the obituaries. For me, we discussed it honestly when we got done watching the movie. For me, it's just a hard 3. That just is what it is. For me, 3. If I finish the movie, you will never get lower than a 3. Don't get me wrong. That's not exactly something to be proud of either, as far as how I'm rating your movie. Yeah, I could finish it, so it's at least going to be a 3. No, that's not something to be proud of. But the fact of the matter is, like, if I can't finish your movie, I'm barely going to give you anything. Like, the fact of the matter is, I saw a movie called Cocaine Shark that I would rate at a bare minimum of a 0.5 or a 1. I shit you not, I didn't even make it 5 minutes. Me and Mrs. Vamp were looking at each other like, no, we're done. It's a wrap. So yeah, look, it's got hilarity. We love campy. We love blood. We love just fun, goofy shit. But the fact is, the bottom line is, for me, this movie still, it's just not good. So yes, I did like the casting. The quality of cast was cool. But the movie's just not good. It's a struggle. And like we discussed before, it felt long. It was long, and you felt it was long. So for me, it's just a hard 3.
Yeah, I'm the same way too. I give it a 3. Like I said, I think they could have cut out 3/4 of that movie, made it like maybe an hour tops, maybe a little over an hour. They could have cut out a lot of the trim the fat of that movie, and maybe it might have been a little bit better. I might have gave it a little better rating if it wasn't as long. And like I said, like you said, if it wasn't feeling like it was taking forever, it was one of those movies, like you said, it was just dragging and dragging and dragging. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, we finished it, which is always kudos to these kind of low budget horror movies. If you can finish it, at least, like I said, we laughed a little bit. It had its moments that were like, yeah, it's funny, you know. You mean, I mean, I'm a sucker for poop and dick jokes, so I'll laugh at those all the time, even if it's stupid and like, why was that even there for? But yeah, I mean, even giving this a 3 is, oh, that's about as good as I can get this thing ever, as a 3.
Yeah. And again, it's, that's, I can't bury it for its inadequacies, because again, we were able to finish the movie. And the thing is, we watch movies to be entertained and whatnot. So there is something to be said for, for seeing a movie through. So I can't just completely bury it as a fully don't waste your time, but I can't in good conscience also sit back here and be like, oh, hell yeah. Like, we reviewed and published Antichrist, which is a 2-hour movie that we love, but you're invested in it and it doesn't feel 2 hours. So it's one thing to have a 2-hour long movie that you're invested in and you're interested and is keeping you, on the edge of your seat, versus another movie which is a drastically different design, of course, than the other 2-hour movie, but just feels dragged out, where, you chop that movie from 145 down to 125. Maybe you can even trim some of the blood, trim some of the absurdity, and really try to stick more to the story. And I do think you get a better product. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're still going to rock it out as an overall score, but it probably, I could see us considering a 5.
Yeah.
But that's not the way it's going to be today. So in agreement there, Ghouls and Goblins, it is coming. That's the final count. That's the way it's going to be for Rottentail, for Devil, and for Vampire. It is going to be a hard, flat 3 for Rottentail on the obituaries. That is what we say, and what we say goes. And I hope you guys enjoyed all of this. As always, Devil and I love talking about this stuff, hanging out with you guys, and reviewing. So we got more awesome shit coming your guys' way. We'll be back in a little bit, friends. Horns up, fangs out. This is Vampire and Devil signing off.
All we know about Albert Einstein is he was a genius, but his brother Frank was a monster.
Hey Dracula, what do you like to watch? I like to watch the Vampire and Devil podcast. Of course, Vampire is my favorite.
What's up there, ghouls and goblins and fangs around the world? I'm coming at you with an edition of Vampire's Coffin Nails. And I just got done watching The Vampire Next Door. It's a 2024 movie that just came out not that long ago, obviously, directed by Sean King. It's pretty cool. It's basically kind of this American Pie meets The Girl Next Door kind of rom-com kind of thing, you know. It's got some fun little angles, and basically it's about this guy Cameron. It's like a high school kid with dealing with the fact that he's in love with, you know, Diane, who's been his love interest ever since he was like really young. And then a beautiful girl moves in next door who is the vampire next door by the name of Victoria. And basically, Cameron ends up becoming Victoria's familiar, basically the person who's helping her out. She's basically on the revenge tour. She's out trying to find the vampire who was in charge of killing her lover from like 200 years ago. But it's definitely all over the place when it comes to the romantic angle. It's kind of this love triangle meets love square meets like love trapezoid, because you've obviously got Cameron with the two girls, but you've also got another guy who's in love with Diane that Cam's kind of helping get to know her for some reason. But then you've also got Cam's co-worker who's into Cameron. It's definitely everywhere when it comes to the romance. But anyway, Cameron's helping out Victoria. She's kind of taking out vampire after vampire after vampire, trying to find her, you know, her lover's murderer. And in no real shocking surprise, it turns out that the vampire that was in charge of murdering her lover was Diane, the girl that Cameron's been into for years. So it's a really interesting angle. Honestly, I don't really have anything bad to say about the movie. It's fun, it's flirty, it's just kind of a good time. It's got a little bit of bloodlust to it, and it's got some cool angles, and the acting is quality. So if you're into just kind of a good time, some laughs, you know, this movie's not going to win any awards, but it's definitely not trashy. It's not a train wreck or anything. It's a good time. When it comes to the grade, it's going to get 7 coffin nails. That's the way it is. So that's all I got to say about The Vampire Next Door, directed by Sean King, for Vampire's Coffin Nails.
It's the Devil here with another quick movie review. Just got done watching the 2024 Lisa Frankenstein movie. Kind of reminded me of the old rom-coms of the 80s, like My Boyfriend's Back and stuff like that. It was pretty good. I wish it would have been a little bit more gorier, but you know what I mean. These rom-com movies are always gonna sink you in. You should check it out.
Our ever so devout and beloved devilish and vampy people. As always, this is Vampire and Devil. We're coming at you, and we've got yet another showdown, face to face, camera to camera, fangs to flames, between Vampire and Devil. We appreciate you guys. You rock. We love that you're so down for the support of the show, and you're having such a good time with everything that that myself, Vamp, and my man Devil are bringing at you guys. So we're going to get right into our next showdown. It is our first vampire showdown. We are really, really stoked. This is going to be a good one. We got a really cool comparison with definitely plenty to contrast between the two of these, man. We're doing Argento's Dracula, and we're doing Let the Right One In.
Yeah, we wanted to do a vampire one because, you know, obviously we're going to do a vampire with Vamp on the show, but we wanted to do one that was kind of like a foreign vampire one. So that's what we decided to do. What movie should we do that's a foreign version of vampire? Now, like I said, there's tons and tons of vampire foreign movies. And we'll probably maybe do a part 2 of this because there are many. I mean, they all go from the original. I mean, Nosferatu is technically a foreign, you know, vampire movie too. So, but yeah, so we wanted to, you know, give a little bit of love to the Vamp and have him pick out which vampire movie. I was kind of curious what foreign vampire movie he was gonna pick, and he picked the Dario Argento one, which, you know, anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge Dario Argento fan. So it was kind of like, oh, okay, you want to go with that card? Then I will pick Let the Right One In. Because I think that is probably one of the better vampire movies that's come out within the last 15, 20 years, I think.
Yeah, definitely, man, for sure. But you also do know that you also do love that because you've got a soft spot for your need and want of sucking Asia down into your inferno.
Oh yeah. That's what I said. Any Dario Argento movie, you know, I love for multiple reasons. Dario Argento movies are always really well written. They're always really cool, bloody. There's always people's eyeballs getting gouged somewhere. Lots of blood and guts. There's always a lot of titties, and half of those titties are usually Asia Argento's daughter. So
Seriously.
I'm always for seeing Asia Argento naked as much as I possibly can. So
Right, for sure. Even though that's not weird or creepy in any way.
yeah. Yeah,
But
I
no,
mean, I'm pretty sure she's got some. She's talked about, some of the childhood trauma she's had from being in some of these movies as a little girl, from doing all these crazy stuff that Argento wants her to do in those movies.
no, absolutely. Especially as we get into it, we're going to kick it off with Argento's Dracula, which is from 2012, which is kind of funny because, I mean, geez, that was 12 years ago already.
Yeah, yeah, I know. That's why whenever I looked, I was like, "Damn, that movie's been around that long already." I'm like, it doesn't seem like that movie came out 12 years ago.
No, it definitely doesn't. But the one thing that's actually really interesting too about this movie, and obviously we did not watch it this way as we were, prepping for the episode and just reminding ourselves of these movies. But this movie was promoted and actually originally made as a 3D film.
Yeah, yeah. It was like, I guess it was Argento's first time into the 3D realm, and you can definitely, as we talk about this movie, but you can definitely tell that there were definitely scenes to watching, even watching the 2D version that we were watching, that were basically primed for perfect 3D stuff.
Yeah. And that's it's we'll just kind of use that as a bridge because we don't really start on downers, and this isn't really so much of a downer. It's just a point to be made because we're very, subjective and very honest about the way we break these things down, is that there are certain parts that I did find a little tacky, and I thought the CGI was kind of weird and a little weak for the caliber of Dario's movies. When you look at stuff like Suspiria and the countless amazing movies that he's put out, there were parts and CGI, what I felt were kind of like imperfections that just seemed a little weird and a little campy for that type of movie. Like at one point, when he's morphing into the werewolf and just the way the mouth and teeth and everything were forming, I was just kind of like, this is awfully cartoony for Dario's more serious, bloody style, even when the vampire morphed into the owl and was chasing down a victim, which I thought was a very interesting thing to do for when vampires into wolves is not that foreign, but everybody, of course, associates vampires with turning into bats. But I found it very, very interesting that Dario went the route of this, having him turn into an owl, which I thought was a very, very interesting take as well. But yeah, I think that has a lot to do with why there were certain scenes that I got reacquainted with that I'm looking at being like, this is very kind of awkwardly cartoony for what Dario usually puts forward, to then realize that, well, the movie was originally shot for certain things to be very prominent in 3D. So there's a good chance that could be the reason why certain scenes were weird to me.
Yeah. Because I was thinking that too. I was like, maybe. But then again, Dario's movies are primarily always been real life effects and stuff like that, where he doesn't use too much of the digital side of it. And I guess this was him kind of tipping his toes into the digital side of things. So yeah, it was weird. And then you were talking about him transforming into other stuff. Yeah, it was really weird seeing that. Like at one time he was like flies, but that was kind of cool. The transformation from when he went from a bunch of flies to them forming into him was pretty neat. But yeah, then there was like the cockroaches and other bugs, and it was just like, it's like, I guess the Dracula can turn into whatever the hell he wants to turn into, I guess now.
Yeah, it was weird, and I'm all for thinking outside the box, but there were definitely a couple of transformations that seemed weird to me. I thought it was kind of interesting for the owl. I didn't hate it. It was just kind of unique personally. I wasn't really overly into like the roaches and bugs. It felt a little nicky to me, but at the same time, but I did like the other flying, flies kind of thing, because it kind of worked a little bit as well. But it was I mean, Dario is not exactly from a little place I like to call Earth. He never has been. Yeah. So at the same time, I can't take cheap shots at a guy who's clearly built an amazing career of really quality movies with thinking outside the box.
Oh yeah. And even with this movie, I mean, you have such an iconic movie because this is basically, you know, basically right after Bram Stoker, not right after, but like the whole thing is the premise of the Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah, what they would
Basically,
call like the universe.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, like the whole kind of same storyline with the guy coming to visit, and then the sister, the girlfriend coming to visit, and you got Van Helsing and all that. The basically everything that you would think of a Bram Stoker's Dracula was the same way. But then there were a lot of extra things that he put into it that were never part of the story. Then he added a couple other things that were part of the stories that you didn't see in other movies, the Dracula movies. So yeah, it was really like kind of like an odd retelling of the story.
Yeah, because it was also very interesting. I mean, I do think very highly of this movie, and I'll get into more details later when we get to that part of what we discussed. But there were certain things that I were interesting to me about this, and I didn't hate the design, but being that it kind of reminds me of like one of our previous showdowns when we were talking about lore and research and sticking to certain, stylistic like truths that I found a little bit strange about this, because it definitely, like I said, is part of that Bram Stoker universe, just like you said as well, with those characters, Van Helsing, Mina, Lucy, Dracula, Jonathan Harker, right out of that universe. But the thing that I found was interesting was the conspicuously like absent Renfield. That was incredibly strange to me. He's a frankly important character when it comes to that universe, whether it be Bela Lugosi's Dracula or, of course, Bram Stoker as well. He's a well-known and very prominent character. And, of course, there's the spin-offs. Everybody knows how much that me and Mrs. Vamp love Dracula Dead and Loving It and watch it regularly. And Peter McNichol's portrayal of Renfield is of legend. It's so great. Very ludicrous, but so great. But anyway, being that this movie was based so solidly off of, Bram Stoker and Bela Lugosi, it was very strange to have Renfield conspicuously absent and have Jonathan Harker almost used in Renfield's place as the guy who was attacked, almost trying to make subservient to Dracula, but then eventually just killed.
Yeah, I mean, to me too. You like you said, the Renfield kind of role kind of almost went to the guy who was in love with the girl vampire that he made in the very beginning, the blonde girl. Like, yeah, because like you saw Dracula come into the prison and let him out of the prison. So you're like, okay, this guy's gonna turn into what would eventually be maybe Renfield. And then all of a sudden you find out, well, his loyalties is not really to Dracula. His loyalties are more into this vampire chick.
Yeah, and that's the Jonathan Harker character, who normally was more of the support system for Van Helsing as they went after Dracula to protect his love interest, which was Mina. But then you had the Lucy character, almost a little bit more predominant, who is played by Asia Argento. She still meets her demise like the Lucy character always does in the various retellings. But she definitely had a prominent, almost more so role, and a certain what felt like tie-in with Jonathan. But again, it still is based around, Mina's character still, fighting through everything, even taking a bite at the end, but due to the final confrontation, didn't get affected by it. But again, we'll get into that as well.
Yeah, and like you were saying too, with we've talked about, but Aja being in this, it is one to mention that this is actually, out of all the movies that she's done for her father, this is the first time she's ever been killed in one of his movies.
No, that's very, very true. And I think that has more to do with casting. But I also think it's also I think it speaks to the right person for the right role without loyalties, because he clearly could have cast Aja for Mina.
Yeah,
and
which you would think
and
they
had her
would have
survive.
be. Yeah, yeah, because it's like, if this was a Rob Zombie movie, Mina would have been, you know, what's her name?
Sherry.
Sherry, yeah, Sherry Moon, yeah, she would have definitely played the main character. So it was like you would think, okay, you see her name, Asia Argento's in this movie. Okay, she's gonna obviously play the Mina character. Nope, and I think that's why he probably did it, was because you were assuming that, and then he's like, well, I never killed my daughter in a movie, so obviously Mina doesn't die, so let's put her as Lucy instead, and we'll kill her.
Yeah, no, for sure. So let's so since we've been talking about Aja, who plays the Mina character, a lot of people know her from Triple X, as well, as far as not a Dario movie, is why I'm kind of throwing that one out, which that was probably one of her more, I'd say, mainstream roles that just kind of put her onto like the average moviegoer, because remember at the time that Triple X came out, Vin Diesel was really coming into like celebrity, with not only Fast to the Furious, but also Pitch Black and stuff like that. But you've got Thomas Kretschmann, who plays Dracula, who's also in the second Blade movie, as like, the two main dominant characters, obviously, outside of Mina herself.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of ones people might notice is, like I said, if you're not a fan of Dario Argento, like you said, Aja being in Triple X, but she was also in George Romero's Land of the Dead.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we talked a little bit about like the CGI and stuff like that, but the one thing that was also a little bit weird is like the bridge scenes, what a lot of people would call the cut scenes, were a little bit dicey.
Yeah. The editing on this movie was another movie that we've talked about before with other movies. Yeah, the editing in this movie was really, really weird. It's just like all of a sudden the cut scene and the next scene didn't kind of go together. You're like, what the hell is going on here? It added to the kookiness of this movie. And the kookiness of this whole entire movie, I think, is, we've talked about all these characters, all these actors who are in this movie, is the guy who plays Van Helsing himself, Rutger Hauer, comes out of nowhere to play Van Helsing. You're like, what? Like that came out of left field.
It really did. I was like, I remember watching it for the first time back in the day, but then getting obviously re-inclined with it the other day and being like, that's such a unique casting. That's a weird casting. Like, even using the parody movie, like I said, that Mrs. Vamp and I love, in Dracula Dead and Loving It, while Leslie Nielsen killed it as that character, as Dracula, that's still a weird casting, man. Like, I almost feel like, based off Mel Brooks' style, Gene Wilder would have been more his first design for like that character. But it's crazy looking at something like that, even though it completely fits. Because when you look at Leslie Nielsen's portrayal of Dracula in Dead and Loving It, it does work like Gary Oldman in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like, the look is there, the posh, the style is there. But and that's the other thing too that kind of brings us back a little bit to when we were talking about European and the movies we were choosing, is because, while a movie like Bram Stoker's Dracula, it came out, dominant in the States, people like Gary Oldman and stuff, but it is still based off a European and British author, book, all that stuff.
Yeah, where this one was, was very Italian.
Yes.
Even though it wasn't like predominantly filmed in Italy, because that stuff like that, which is another part of this movie that's really, really odd too, is the location, where in all the other Dracula movies we always get other scenes and other parts of this movie that have to do not with being in Transylvania, where this whole movie is literally just in one setting in that one town the whole entire time.
Right. And I'll be honest with you, Devil, like, that's actually, I liked that personally.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons while the editing is very dicey and bizarre, I think and I would have liked it cleaned up. Don't get me wrong. I would have liked to have seen it cleaned up better. I think that helped not break my fantasy while watching the movie is because it does take place in one town dominantly, very similar to the more recent New School Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman,
Yeah.
where it is based on the one location, the one basic town the whole time. I think that's one of the reasons while I still felt, of course, like we discussed, that the editing miscues were noticeable, it wasn't so bad and so over the top that it broke my fantasy. Again, maybe because this particular movie's very my style for my love of Dracula and vampire movies. Maybe it was easier for me than others to not have their fantasy broken. But I did love the fact that it was dominantly around this one town, this one setting, which I think kind of aided in the protection of like the miscues.
Yeah. But to segue off of you saying cleaning things up, the best part of this movie, obviously for me, is when Lucy is taking her bath and Aja Argento is naked. But the only crazy thing, you were talking about editing and stuff like that and makeup too. She's naked, but yet her tattoo that literally starts from her navel is not predominantly shown in this. So I'm kind of curious on if they edited that in post or if they did some kind of makeup or something like that. Because I know her tattoos are usually predominant in a
Yeah.
lot of movies, but I mean, maybe because of the time period, they didn't want her to have this. Because she has if anybody doesn't know, she has like an angel kind of tattoo that goes straight from her belly down. But yeah, that was probably my favorite part of the movie. Like I said, I give that 3 thumbs up, if you know what I mean.
So you were the one who left those fang bites on the back of her calf.
Yeah, that wasn't him, that was me. I was
That
like,
was you.
yeah, that's the reason why she died. I was like, I like my chicks a little dead, so I was like, she was breathing too much. I was like, you know what, Lucy's got to go. I got to get some of that.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely, bro. Honestly, if I'm sure it would be easy to do in post, but considering that this movie is 2012, I'd probably kind of lean towards the makeup. I'm sure it's probably relatively easy to have something that can like last in a shower scene, like a bath scene, and not get like washed away and stuff like that. So being at the time that, the movie was only 10, 12 years ago, I kind of lean that direction. That was probably really easy to just have something thick enough, flesh colored, to just handle that business than have to like do the different kind of editing or whatever that they needed to do.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, because it's weird with that post editing because we'll talk. I'll talk like very briefly about it, but there are those actors and actresses that don't like being naked, and I know Jessica Alba is one of those ones that always complains about like doing that kind of stuff. And she was in a one about a serial killer in Texas, and she's in a shower scene, and apparently she filmed that scene wearing a brawling panties, and they just post edited to make her look like she was naked.
Oh,
So
really?
it's like, yeah, so it's one of those weird things. Like, I mean, who knows? Like I said, it's crazy. I mean, like I said, Aja's no, yeah, she's always been predominantly naked in a lot of his movies. So, and I'd have to go back and try to remember if any of those other ones she had the tattoo showing. Like I said, it might have just been because of a period piece. But yeah, I was kind of curious on that. But you know me, I'm always uh, eyeing the details of Aja Argento's body.
Absolutely. I definitely know that she's got her large butterfly in Triple X because if you have seen that movie, just based off the very end scene when she and Xander are in Bora Bora and she's wearing a bikini, you can see that she's got her butterfly, piece sticking out of her bikini and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's definitely a thing when it comes to that. So Devil, let's get into the obituaries. Let's talk a little bit about the kill count and how we rate this movie. For me, I honestly do rate it quite high. Not crazy high, but I do rate it quite high. I really do love this movie. I'm also biased in my love not only of my culture, my kind, but I love those period pieces. It's very similar, like I said, to a previous showdown that we talked about. I like that kind of research, those period pieces. I like the reimagining of certain things. I don't have a problem with you getting outside the box and putting certain spins on everything, yeah, I might feel that something's tacky. Maybe I feel that something's not necessary, or maybe I wouldn't have done it that way. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I think it's necessarily a bad thing. So while I didn't love the editing, but I didn't lose my fantasy because I loved the shooting in the small town. And I felt that the certain parts of the morphing into animals was a bit tacky and looked kind of cartoonish. I do have to take into consideration that we're watching 2D, DVD versions of this movie. We're not watching a 3D version in the theaters. And my only major criticism is for this style, with the characters of the same name playing very similar roles, I didn't love the exclusion of Renfield. It was weird to me to see him missing. One other thing, though, that I will say about the CGI that I didn't discuss earlier, but I do want to bring up, I did like the death of Dracula scene. I thought it was very well done. It was very interesting, even with my criticisms of other CGI parts of that movie. I will say the opening of the chest cavity to the turning to ashes, like kind of turning to a statue and then breaking to ashes. I really liked that. I thought Dracula's death was really good. I thought it was very well done. I thought the CGI for that worked very well. So not to get too far off on a tangent, there are definitely parts that I thought were very solid. There are criticisms, of course, that I have, but all in all, in the big picture, from the blood, the casting, and the execution, this movie is an 8 for me. I really, really like it. I really enjoy it. I think it's solid pretty much from top to bottom, and I think the action starts quickly and rides through the whole movie.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, I'm a huge Argento fan. I find this movie to be one of his worst movies. Not the worst, but I find it one of his. It's not par to a lot of Argento's movies. I probably maybe because it is a movie based on canon, but based on the Bram Stoker and Dracula lore. So it's not something that he created or wrote or kind of did himself. Not like, Suspiria and all those, all the great movies that we love from Argento. But yeah, I mean, it still had that little bit of Argento flair in it, but it didn't have a lot of that Argento flair that I love, the Gallo horror film that he does, with a lot of the eye scenes and a lot of blood, and in the blood is like very pulling. But like I said, I mean, obviously, it's still a great movie. I still like it. Like I said, anytime I get to see Aja naked, it's always going to get bonus points. So I get that. So for me, honestly, like I said, I mean, I can't rate it too high because, like I said, in my opinion, I think it's one of the lower rated Argento films. And even
Sure.
watching it now it was like, man, it's tough to watch because I love a lot of his movies, and yeah, like I said, it's not that it's not the worst one, and it's definitely not even close to being the worst Argento movie. And even being a bad Argento movie is like a billion times better than most people's movies. But anyway, I would definitely go and say I would give this a 7.0.
7.0. No problem, man. No, definitely understandable. All your points are valid. They all make sense. It's like the way it's going to be. Officially, we're locking it in. The kill count on the obituaries for Argento's Dracula will be a 7.5. That is how it is. That is how it shall be. And that is how it will stand. 8 for Vampire. 7 for Dracula. For Devil, we're meeting in the middle at 7.5. So that is the way that we are going to do this for Argento's Dracula. And so let's kick it right back to you, because we have a second half of this showdown to discuss, and that is your pick from Sweden, 2008's Let the Right One In.
Yeah, the Swedes, you know what I'm saying? I mean, like I said, this is predominantly probably, other than, the original Bram Stoker's Dracula, Nosferatu, Near Dark, and Lost Boys, and those kind of movies. This is probably the best vampire movie I've ever seen in my entire life. It's such a great, way to visualize vampire and vampirism and stuff like that. And like I said, they came out in Sweden. Obviously, they remade it again in the Americans because, you know, Americans can't do anything original. They got to just do it the Swedish thing. That's why it was always my idea to make a movie, go to Europe, and then have somebody redo it here, and I'd get paid twice.
Yep,
But anyway,
I assume you're talking about Let Me In.
Yep, Let Me In, which is a good movie. I mean, I still like it. It's not
Yep.
nearly as good as Let the Right One In because American audiences are stupid and you have to tell them exactly what everything's about. And this movie kind of made you think a lot more. You had to figure out if, you know, things were this way or things were that way. But yeah, I love this. I love the fact that this movie was basically like, you know, a little girl that you weren't 100% sure saying that she was a girl like throughout the whole entire movie. And apparently there's some of this has been based off of a book that was written, and then in the book they were talking about her being an actual boy that was castrated and then turned into a vampire so that he couldn't grow grow his thing back. So, you know, I guess he sort of identified as being a female, which is very kind of now with the whole, you know, trans community and stuff like that too, where
Yeah.
he obviously could be a boy, but he identifies as a girl, but then he doesn't really kind of identify as a girl. But I liked it because the character like really didn't, even the boy character in this movie didn't really care. He loved loved the vampire regardless of whatever gender it was, and I love it. And like I said, we're always going to talk about lores and stuff like that when it comes to vampires. And this is the first time you ever see in a vampire movie where what happens when you don't let a vampire into your house and they come into your house anyway.
Yeah.
And you saw that it was physically killing her. Like blood was coming out of her eyes and her ears and her nose and her back and her pores and her hair. And it's, that's why I love the title of it, Let the Right One In, which is like, be careful of who you let in, because once you give a vampire permission to come into your house, like we've seen in a million movies, he basically renders you useless. He can do whatever he wants once he's in your house.
No, for sure. Absolutely. I loved that. The thing about the Let the Right One In that I really love, and for the record, Let the Right One In and Let Me In actually do sit right next to each other in the horror room on my shelf. Obviously, alphabetically, that makes sense. But it's always kind of funny when you have two movies that do have different titles, but are the same basic movie that do still land next to each other. I just think it's funny. And they do sit right next to each other. But anyway, yes, that is the one thing about Let the Right One In is it's one of the best, like, unique written stories that I've ever seen. It's very much like, for me, and George Romero's Martin, where it's a completely different style. That's based around a vampire that doesn't even bite you. He cuts you open with a razor blade.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's one of the most unique stories I've ever had the privilege to watch. It's a unique take on it. I love the styling of it. I love the kind of unassuming, because the funny thing is about the Oscar character, the boy, he himself even has kind of a very effeminate look to him, especially at the very beginning of the movie, where before you even realize his name and his general character, you could go either way on if this person that you're being introduced to is a boy or a girl. It's just kind of the way that he looks. It's not about the way he carries himself, and it's not about upsetting anybody's personal beliefs. It's just, we call it like we see it, and it's clear in front of your face. But anyway, I love the screenplay. I love the writing of the movie. I think the story behind it is so unique and very, very just well written. It's a tricky design of a movie, though, because there's so many different tangents that it loves to go into. And you really have to watch and just study to a certain degree. I think it's an incredibly unique telling of it. I love the screenplay, like I said. I think there's so many different tangents. There's a lot of little like rabbit holes that you can also go into based on how you're reading the movie just as you watch it, which I really, really did like about it. I thought that was so cool.
The character Hawken, you see him as kind of this guardian. He's helping her. He's going out and getting the kills and the blood for her. You kind of figure that, maybe he could have been a young Oscar at one time, and he loves her so much that throughout the years he kind of stuck with her. And, even at the end, whenever he gets caught for trying to kill this little boy, she comes to the hospital and he's basically disfigured, and she bites him and he gives her blood for the last time. And you kind of feel like maybe that's the possibility. But then again, you go into the American version where they just flat out tell you that that's what it is. And it's like, like you said, the Europeans are so much better if you trying to figure out what things are. Okay, this person's this person's that, is that. Where like, the American versions is just straight up like, yeah, that's who he is.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I like a little bit of mystery. I like a little bit of intrigue. I love figuring things out for myself, even if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's kind of like music. Like the way that I connect with a song might not be the way that you connect with a song. I see the lyrics as I read them, or I hear them during the song, and they connect with me this way. You connect with them that way. And I like the fact that things can be left up to interpretation. Who knows? There's something about Let the Right One In that you and I might be wrong about right now while we're talking. But that's not the point. Yeah. Because we watched the movie, we saw things our way. My set of eyes, your set of eyes. And that's the thing I think is like super cool about that movie. I mean, for me, the other thing I also really like about it is that idea of protection, looking out for the person you love for whatever the reason is you love them. Whether they're just your bestie that you're always going to protect, but is going to have a life outside of you, or somebody who's your love interest, and you build and you two are going to be together all the way till the end. I love the end of the movie.
Yeah.
There are parts of the movie, though, that I'm going to get into shortly when we talk about the obituaries that do take points away. But I'll go into detail as that permits. But I love the end of this movie. It's very protection. It's very anti-bully. But it also is very Hatchet, if you've ever seen the end of the first Hatchet movie. And I love the fact that you're watching Oscar being bullied like he'd been getting through most of the movie, and he's being basically drowned. And then from behind him in this pool, a severed head, just falls into the pool. And then all of a sudden the hand, which for the record is a continuity error, because if you actually pay attention to the hand that's holding him underneath the water, no hand would bend that way. That is completely impossible for a person's wrist to hold somebody under the water that way. But that's just a continuity error that I just point out because it's funny. But then all of a sudden, the hand that's holding him underwater just falls in front of the camera as it's been severed off, falling into the pool. And then he resurfaces to a panned out camera to just a bunch of bloody bodies of the four bullies that were picking on him. I thought the end of the movie was bitching.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole entire movie is just really kind of has a lot of cool kill and death scenes. I mean, you have, her, trying to feed underneath that little bridge thing and attacks this guy. And it's a very 30 Days of Night kind of attack. It's a very vicious and violent attack. then you have, like the him cutting the person open and trying to get the guy, get the blood and stuff like that, hanging from a tree. And then you have the girl who is one of the neighbors gets bit. That's probably my favorite part of probably my favorite part of the movie. She all of a sudden starts getting this knack of blood and starts realizing that maybe she's got bit by something, or she's got a virus in her, and she, found out that the sunlight would harm her, and got the orderly to open up the window, and all of a sudden she just bursts into flame, which I thought was just really cool, because it's like, imagine you're working at a hospital and you got some woman that's like kind of crazy and maybe got some kind of virus, and you open it up and it bursts into flames. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of From Dusk Till Dawn, the
Yeah.
very end, where he was like, psychos do not burst into flame no matter how fucking crazy they are.
It's also very near dark, like where the guy's running under the jacket and it's
Yep.
just smoke.
Oh yeah, but yeah. Like I said, this movie had a lot of cool, like dark visuals and a lot of gruesome sections. But yeah, I love that. I love that part at the very end where it's you're seeing it through kind of Oscar's eyes, but not really, because he's got his eyes closed, so he doesn't even really particularly even know what's going on while all this mayhem behind him is all happening. And then once he finds out, he's like, oh shit. He like you pan out and you see all the dead bodies and the limbs, and you're like, oh man, she fucked this up. But I mean, like I said, the whole entire movie, yeah, like you said, it's kind of a love story a little bit. It's like that childhood, crush kind of love kind of story where, two oddballs kind of coming together. Yeah, and definitely a very anti-bullying, because like you said, throughout this whole movie, he's getting bullied, and eventually when he starts going along with with the vampire, and she starts getting him his confidence, he starts to starts to push back a little bit. But yeah, like I said, I loved it, as far as like the storyline for that, because I was like, it's such a unique, you know n- unique approach to a vampire movie, even though almost all vampire, well, not all vampires, but a lot of vampire movies are essentially a love story.
Yeah.
This was kind of like somewhat childhood innocence, even though her character really isn't a child. You don't really find out how old she is, but you can imagine she's probably hundreds and hundreds of years old, probably.
It's actually kind of funny, Devil, because it's actually got a very similar bridge, almost kind of like a future. Had this other movie not ended the way it did, it actually has a very interesting similarities, almost continuity, like tip of the hat to the little vampire
Yeah.
we discussed. With that, not of this world, friendship with of this world, still dealing with people not understanding, bullying, stuff like that. It's just kind of an interesting little thing. It has a very similar arc.
Oh yeah, I mean, 'cause we got to realize, especially with these kind of movies, the vampire. I mean, other than like the sexy ones and like that, they tend to go after the loners and the losers and stuff like that. It's a very empowering kind of movie. Like, if you had the chance to avenge people who have harmed you, would you take it? And like, he kind of, the Oscar's character, kind of, you see him progressively get like that, because in the beginning he's kind of fighting back, but he's only fighting back against a tree.
Yeah.
And then eventually he fights back, but then he fights back, and sometimes that doesn't work very well too, because then the bully's brother comes in, because he's older, and
Yeah.
tries to be the tough guy. But then, when you have a vampire that's your friend, that doesn't work very well for you, and you get your shit chopped up.
Yep, 100%. Speaking of things getting chopped up, I think it's time that we go to the obituaries for Let the Right One In. So let's talk about the kill count. Let's talk about our ratings and how we see it. Devil, your movie, you started off.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, there's a top, five or whatever you want to call of vampire movies that I love, that are a top, the top tier of vampire movies, and this one is definitely the one that's on that top tier. Like I said, not only is it a cool vampire story, it's got cool visuals. It makes you think. It is the anti-bullying establishment of it. It does show you things that we haven't seen in vampire movies, so it has that new taste to it where it's not regurgitating the same old vampire stuff over and over again, but yet staying true to vampire lore too, with not being able to go out in sunlight and the blood and stuff like that. But then, like I said, shows you a lot of stuff that we hadn't seen, like the not getting permission to come in and stuff like that, where it's like, yeah, for a vampire to live long, she kind of does need a familiar, which we see in some vampire movies. You got to have a human familiar to help you out because you can't do things during the day that you would like to. And yeah, so for, like I said, overall, like I said, the fact that this movie, you know, not even much longer. I mean, this movie came out, I can't remember what year it came out right now.
2008.
2008, and then very, very shortly after was they remade this.
Yeah.
So it was like almost it was in that section of horror movies that were made in Europe, and very shortly American audiences remade it. So for me, this movie is always going to be high. I'm going to give it an 8.5.
All right, right on. So here's my thing on that. So I agree with you. I agree, and I stand by also everything that I said. Here's my thing when it comes to that movie, because I get very in there when it comes to vampire movies. And again, I love the story. I think the closing scene is one of the better death scenes I've ever seen. I think it's fantastic. However, I do think this movie very similar, and it takes into account people's individual tastes in movies and how they like them to arc. In my opinion, similar to Amityville Horror, this movie has a very slow burn. You really have to be invested in the story, which, don't get me wrong, like I am, you are. It's a very well-written story, unique style, but it's a very slow burn. Like it feels long. You really have to, in my opinion, make time for this movie. It's less than 2 hours. It's not like it's a crazy thing. And it's not like a previous movie that we talked about that was an hour and 45 minutes, but felt like 3 hours, where we were just like, holy fuck. But it has a very slow burn, and it really kind of takes a while to get going as it's setting up the story. And don't get me wrong, there's value in that, but that's also a very tricky way to do things when it's hard to hold people in, especially on a story they might not be accustomed to. Where you have something like, at least with Argento's Dracula, for example, it's a known story with a right to the point arc that continues on pretty quick. You really have to think and learn and invest in this story. And I think that's a little bit rough rough against the movie by the casual person standards. I love the screenplay. Very similar to Lords of Salem, in my opinion. I love Rob Zombie. The guy can do no wrong. I love the screenplay of that movie. But again, the design of that movie, the arch of that movie, the fact that Sherry, not against her because I do love her a lot, but with her acting skills versus previous Rob Zombie movies where she had the established cast around her, she was a dominant figure in that movie, and I thought that's one of the reasons why that movie lacked a lot, is she struggled a little bit being that focal point. But anyway, to keep it on point, I think that's a big thing against the movie, is the slow burn, the potential for boredom. Love the storyline, love the kills, I love the concept of the slow dying effect. But again, there's an action lack as well. There's an overall kill count missing from a vampire movie that I do feel has kind of established itself as a standard. So I definitely am not taking tons of points off, but I do think that these are vital points that need to be addressed. but do hurt the movie a little bit. People like yourself and myself that really get in there can appreciate the movie for what it is. But for the common person, the people that look for certain points in their movies, I think it's going to fall flat on them. I just don't think they're going to get it. Honestly, so for me, it's a 7. That's kind of the way that I look at it. So here's the thing. This movie falls for us based off an 8.5 and a 7, falls at a 7 3/4. Again, something that we don't do. So how do you want to look at this? What do you think we want to do? Do we lose a point on it and knock it to a 7.5 as its final rating on the obituaries? Or do you think it deserves that 8, maybe for unique script? But it is your movie, Devil. I want to give you, of course, the courtesy to give us your thoughts on whether you think that point should give it the 8 or give it the 7.5.
I mean, yeah, I think I mean, like I said, I'm gonna obviously, plea for the point to go up.
Okay.
And like I said, and my reasoning, like I said, I think should be because the fact that you saw stuff in this vampire movie that you never saw in other ones. Like I said, like you said, valid points. It's not 30 Days of Night where it's continual action, blah, 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 vampire blood guts throughout the whole entire movie. It's an intellectual vampire movie. Very much, it's not meant to. I mean, there are some scenes that are quick and brutal, but overall, yeah, it is a slower intellectual movie. But like I said, there's things in this movie that we've never seen in any vampire movie before or even after. So like the originality of like this script, I think should bump it up a little bit.
You know what, man? I'm cool with that, and I'm down for that cause. And I'll give it to you. I agree. Because one of the things I think is cool, and again, while I love the mystique, the style, the execution of Dario's Dracula, even though it's retelling an old story, one of the things that not only you and I have discussed regularly in and out of this show, but is just common to the keyboard warriors of just movie fandom, is the lack of original ideas. And I do think the unique script, the original idea, the proper telling, and the intellectual aspect, it warrants that acknowledgement. And I think that's the way that it goes. And I think that's important that we acknowledge that and support that and back it. Because, again, unique ideas are fleeting nowadays. It's definitely a struggle right now in current, based off where we live, current American cinema when it comes to unique stuff. Again, like you discussed, within a year or so of Let the Right One In, we had Let Me In. Because America just has to feel that they either have to duplicate or do it better, which they didn't do it better, but that's a conversation for another time. So I do think that your reasoning behind it is valid. I think it's worthy of that extra point, and I think we should honor that for sure. So we're going to lock it in on the obituaries. We're going to do Let the Right One In. We're going to give it an 8 on the obituaries. So fans, ghouls, goblins, spooks, and creeps, that's where it's going to be. It's going to be an 8 for Let the Right One In. It's going to be a 7.5 for Argento's Dracula. Fatality. Devil's going to get this one. Vampire's going down. Let the Right One In wins over Argento's Dracula, and that's how we're going to lock it in. We love you, fans. We appreciate you guys. We got so much more coming at you. Like you guys know, we'll see you very shortly. We got more reviews, more skits, more fun, more showdowns. Horns up, bangs out.
Okay, Dreadful Survival Tips, Vampire Edition. Number 42, set your clocks behind. What's that, Dracula? A little midnight snack? Ha! It's 6 a.m. Now you're smoking like brisket. Okay, Dreadful Survival Tips, Vampire Edition. Number 22, Holy Garlic Water. Just a little drizzle to make them sizzle. Okay, Dreadful Survival Tips, Vampire Edition. Number 13, Sunlight. Okay, Dreadful Survival Tips, Vampire Edition. Number 86, Accessorize. Bulky wooden stakes are out. Use chopsticks, small and compact.
What's up? It's the devil again with another self-indulgence movie review. This time I just got done watching The House of the Devil, the 2009 movie. It was pretty cool, kind of scary, kind of slow burn. There wasn't very much of a house for the devil, but if the devil is in the house, you better watch out. So go check it out now. This is the part of the show where we honor those who have died in the month of April. This time we honor these three. Bud Abbott from the Abbott and Costello movies. Jonathan Demme, who directed Silence of the Lambs. And Alfred Hitchcock, who inspired so many horror directors. We honor these three, lost but never forgotten.